Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. We are very excited to be speaking with our colleagues at the Elmhurst History and Cemeteries Preservation Society to learn all about what they've been doing to advocate on behalf of the African American burial ground in Elmhurst, Queens. My name is Katie Peace. I am the Director of Communications at the Preservation League of New York State, and I'm just so excited to have you here today. So I'm assuming most of you know who the League is. But for those who don't, we are a nonprofit that operates statewide, doing all sorts of work to promote historic preservation in New York State. Sorry about that. Here we go. Here we go. And we do that in all sorts of different ways. We have technical services, grant programs, public programs, our Excellence in Historic Preservation Awards, which are coming up on Tuesday, November 10th, if you would like to join us for that exciting announcement as well. We do public policy and advocacy at the federal, state, and local level, and we have our Endangered Properties Intervention Program. And if all of you are familiar with the League, thank you. We do our work because of you. You make it possible. If you have found us from some fluke of the internet, we are so glad that you did, and we are excited for you to learn more about us and what we do, and in particular, our 7 to Save program, which is why we are here today. This is a biennial list of at-risk historic sites in New York State. You can see we're covering a lot of ground with this year's list. And today we're going to be talking about the Elmhurst African American Burial Ground, but we've also listed sites around the state, including the Hudson Athens Lighthouse, Central Tech High School in Syracuse, Sag Harbor Hills, Azarest, and Nineveh subdivisions, also known as Sands in Suffolk County, an African American beach community on the East End. We have the New York State Barge Canal System, Richard Lippold's Orpheus and Apollo, a site-specific para-architectural installation that was removed from Lincoln Center and that we are working with our colleagues Landmark West to hopefully convince them to reinstall. And we have Parrott Hall in Geneva. But today it's all about the Elmhurst African American Burial Ground. And we have the folks from the Elmhurst History and Cemeteries Preservation Society who are going to talk to you about their work. And we're really excited about that. They have been doing great work since 2011 to try to draw attention to this historic site, to have it properly honored, and they've been really pounding the pavement to make sure that that happens. So Elmhurst had been Newtown, which was settled by free Black folks after slavery was ended. And the site that is now an empty lot had housed a church, which had housed a cemetery, and all of that was lost to history and time and negligence until 2011, when the lot was being developed and excavators found the woman in the iron coffin, which you can see photos of here. Some of you may be familiar with that. That's sort of what most people know if they know about the Elmhurst African American Burial Ground. That made a bunch of news back in 2011. PBS did a short documentary on it in their Secrets of the Dead program, so that was kind of a splashy thing. But the discovery of that particular woman led to the discovery of many other people who had been buried there. And so the site had been planned for development, but once they found human remains, they put a pause on that. And the folks that we'll be talking to today are going to talk a little bit about the advocacy work that they've been doing to really try to halt whatever development wants to happen there to honor the people who were interred there. So you can see it's an empty lot. The New York Times has covered this back in 2019. It doesn't really look like much at this point, but it's an important place. And this is sadly a pretty common story with African burial grounds in the States. And, you know, some have been honored and many have not. And we really want to make sure that this gets the attention that it deserves. In 2020, Untapped New York covered it as well, and it is still under threat. So we are really excited to welcome the folks from the Elmhurst History and Cemeteries Preservation Society to talk about the work that they've been doing so that you all get a little bit of a glimpse into what's going on out in Elmhurst, Queens, and understand why this site is so important and why we're all so passionate about saving it. So we are going to be welcoming Marialena Giampino, James McMenamin, Jennifer Ochoa, and our colleague Simeon Bankoff from the Historic Districts Council is going to be moderating that conversation. He's worked with them a lot directly through his work at HDC, so we're excited about this conversation. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Simeon to take over and start this chat between all four of you.
Thank you so much, Katie. Hold on a sec. Let me turn on my video. Or you'll have to turn on that video. Katie?
Yes.
You'll have to turn on my video. I can't turn on my video myself.
Oh.
There we go.
There
There
you
we go. Thank you, 2020. Hi, everyone. I'm Simeon Bankoff. I'm the Executive Director of the Historic Districts Council. HDC is the citywide advocate for Newark's historic neighborhoods. We work in all 5 boroughs with a constituency of over 500 neighborhood-based groups trying to work on preserving, enhancing, and protecting the physical character of the neighborhoods. One of our principal programs is the 6 to Celebrate program, and we were very pleased in 2018. Was it 2018, Marialena? I think it was. That to work with Elmhurst as one of the groups that we were focusing in on the important historic resources that exist within the neighborhood that require protection and also a greater public awareness. My colleagues at the Elmhurst Cemeteries and Historic Preservation Society have been doing a bang-up job, really kind of beating for an area that many New Yorkers don't know and more should about Elmhurst, Queens. They are the experts, so I will let them on. I will let them sort of speak about this. I think that probably the best thing to do would be to begin with talking about what was the history behind the cemetery, and then we can work our way towards 2011, and then how it actually, how it all unfolded. So, greetings, welcome. Thank you all for joining us. We're really pleased for the Preservation of New York State to allow us this opportunity. And Marialena, Jennifer, James, take it on. Oh, and I should let you know, as Katie just said in the chat, we will be taking questions at the end.
Thank you, Simeon. Thank you, New York Preservation League. So you did a wonderful introduction. We have been working really hard the past few years, especially with the African American burial ground. And I think James would probably like to give you a little brief history behind the burial ground itself.
Okay, hi, James here. Basically, the African American burial ground, which was rediscovered in October of 2011, was called the Dutch Lane Cemetery, which began in 1828. You see, this plot of land was said to have been bought by 4 ex-slaves from a white farmer, this property, and there is a deed for that. They started a carpentry shop in which prayer services began, which led to the formation and the building of an actual church. So the burial ground itself is said to have begun in 1828. However, there may have been burials going as far back as 1818. The burial ground and the church, there was a physical church. There was more than one structure, including a school. It went through several different churches and over time. The Iron Coffin lady, as we know, passed away in 1851 of smallpox. But the St. Mark's AME, which is whatever is underground belongs to them, began, I believe it was 1906. So the lady who we believe to be Martha Peterson, based on census records, was not affiliated with St. Mark's. She passed away about 55 years prior to that. So there were disputes between Methodist and Presbyterian churches over the course of a century. So it went back and forth between different congregations. Anything I could elaborate on, let me know, please.
The wonders of New York City. It's very loud outside, so I was keeping myself muted. That's great, James. So, why don't we actually kind of fast forward at that point? So the AMA Church left around 1940. So, right? That's that
Well, 1929, 1930.
1929, 1930. The building on the church site itself was demolished around that period of time.
I think it lasted, the structure may have lasted another 10 to 15 years on, and then it was taken up. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually have a photograph from 1940. So we believe like 1939, 1940 of so I think like James said about around that time, then it must have been sold or something, the site, and then the church was demolished.
So why didn't you take us for the last 70 years? Or actually 80 years? My goodness, it's 2020, isn't it? Just. So then what happened? So then it was a vacant lot. Eventually, by the mid-century.
Yes, the building that took its place on that corner, the large rectangular building, was the Peerless Aeronautical Supply Company. They made parts for the government, for aircraft, radar systems, fighter planes and whatnot. I believe they were there from 1947 to 1986. I myself played on that block, so you would see ladies or people come out for smoking breaks, dressed up in smocks and masks, and we always thought it was a creepy place. We did not know what was going on behind those walls. But over time, especially now with social media threads, you do see people that say, oh, I was an employee of the Peerless Company, and we were aware that there was a burial ground existing where the parking lot was and whatnot. So to say it was rediscovered is a little bit of a misnomer, because there were people that were aware of his existence. And also the Queens Historical Society did put a James W. Pennington co-named of the street, and this was prior to the discovery of the Iron Coffin lady. So they were also aware of the site based on maps. But of course, the developer who started ripping and gobbling up the corner, didn't seem to be aware at the time.
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. So the developer started, as you said, doing work on the property.
Yes.
And it was around 2000.
October 2011.
All right. And then what happened?
A body was discovered, and on the news media, it seemed to sound like, I thought it was perhaps a homeless person who was taking shelter there, because it said that it was the body itself was it looked like it had not expired that long ago. But in a karmic, twist of fate, the medical examiner's office archaeologist on scene, who was Scott Warnish, knew right away that this was a much older body, and he was also familiar with the type of casket, which was from the Almond Fisk Metallic Case Company, which had its foundry on 69th Street, which is still called Fisk Avenue. That was the old name of the 7 train, between modern day Roosevelt Avenue and Queens Boulevard. It existed, his primary foundry at that location. So he knew right away, and he also saw the telltale signs of smallpox and knew this is a contagion, so we better not do an inspection, but under better conditions to examine, so we don't unleash, any contagion.
Right.
Yes.
Just to be clear, I mean, not that everybody who's perhaps watching this is familiar, but whenever a human remain is discovered in the course of doing development, there is a stop work, and the police are called immediately. The medical examiner is called. And another thing is that only funeral directors are allowed to transport human remains. So there is an immediate sort of stop, let's see what's going on situation happening here. That happened. It hit the news media. The Woman in the Iron Coffin, which is just, like something like from P.D. James, or, that just is a wonderfully evocative mystery. Happened. And so when did Elmhurst, when did the society get involved? What sort of work did you do to sort of find out the information about that?
So
Myself
about
or
2007,
okay.
yeah, we were finally incorporated and 501(c). Prior to that, we had known about the site. So when we were an official organization, we said we're going to start working on it and finding out as much information as possible, historical research, of course. And the most important part of it was to reach out to the St. Mark's AME Church, which is now located, it's their 4th building on Northern Boulevard in considered Jackson Heights right now. So that was important to reach out to them and talk to the actual congregants and the reverend of the church. So we did that immediately, and we basically told them, we want to help. We want to do anything we can to bring awareness to the importance of the site, the history of the people, of the situation that's happening now. And from there on, we that's what we were doing. We were basically just bringing as much awareness as we could to like everything, the history, trying to preserve the site, and just seeing that everything there is pretty much under control. We checked up on the site as much as possible, and just pretty much doing all that advocacy for it.
Okay. So so we have we have the Woman in the Iron Coffin. You got in contact with the Descendant Church, and then what happened? Take me through that. There wasn't actually the body reinterred.
James, do you want to get this, or?
It's a complicated story, so I just want everyone, especially if people are like looking this up on the internet, they will see that there were several steps in here.
Yeah. So
Yes, that was. Go ahead.
Go ahead, James. You can explain the whole.
That was arranged with St. Mark's AME. They found African American funeral director service in New Jersey. And the body of the Iron Coffin lady was then reinterred, I believe, at Mount Olivet Cemetery under very respectful circumstances, and she was given a beautiful service. And let me just add, when she was rediscovered, she had a beautiful wide hair comb, a chemist's stockings, and a hairband. So it really shows that she was a respected member of society. She was a well-loved person, and even amidst the threat of smallpox, there were people handling her that buried her in this dignified manner. And so basically that was, from what we understand, the reburial. In our case, we were just trying to get as much exposure as possible with media attention, and also walking tours, and writing articles, and talking to print media, and also in our meetings with the church, to be extra sensitive as well as respectful, because we knew that whatever the church decided, we would abide by. And we just wanted to be there to be supportive as well as advocates for this sacred site.
No, it sounds like you really took the sort of right and sensitive and thoughtful approach to it. So, so then what happened? So the body was reinterred, and then
Yeah,
what?
yeah. So actually, it's an interesting story. So, just going back a little bit, when the city wanted to widen Corona Avenue, it went upon some of the church property, and this is about 1928. I'm going to say, definitely before 1930. And a lot of the widening of the street led up right to the church doors. So we're assuming that whatever bodies that were disturbed, the church itself back then had moved some of those bodies to Mount Olivet Cemetery. So they were able to locate that location, and that's where Martha Peterson was reinterred, where the rest of those few individuals that they found when they widened Corona Avenue were. So that's a nice little, representation of how like a lot of thought went into this. And if anyone's interested, they can watch the PBS documentary, A Lady in the Iron Coffin Lady, which shows the whole process that they had to go through before they had to, before they could reinter her. And we also tried to landmark the site. We got a lot of support. A lot of people wanted to see the site preserved. They wanted to see it landmarked. They wanted a memorial. All those wonderful things that to just really memorialize the people and the story and the history there. So that's something that I know a lot of people wanted. And like James said, going forward right now, we're still advocating. But in the meantime, there is going to be some type of you guys want to stay tuned. There's going to be some press release on what's going to be happening at the site. So we're all kind of waiting for that. And I don't know if you want to go into that now, or maybe we could do an announcement going forward in the future.
Just so everyone who's tuned in understands, what happened is as part of the development on this very irregular site, I don't know if Katie has a slide for the actual site itself, the site plan. If you do have that, it might actually be helpful, Katie, if you could put it up. It required a special permit from the New York City's Board of Standards and Appeals in order to actually put the to allow the development there. As part of that, New York City's Landmarks Preservation Commission, which is the city agency that, in addition to landmarking things, also oversees archaeology within the city. They are the actual local government agency that oversees archaeology underneath the New York State historic preservation laws. Signed a restrictive declaration with the developer saying that the developer needed to do archaeological investigation and do a mitigation in conjunction with the church. What's the name of the church again, Marialena?
It's St. Mark's.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much, Katie. All right. It's a little complicated, but if you can see on this map where it says S Railroad Avenue, that is actually a railroad cut, or that is what became it's next to the tracks, which are the LIRR. This site doesn't really have great access from the road, so it's behind a bunch of existing buildings next to the railway cut, so that that's why they required the zoning permits and the variances to allow it. They entered into an agreement, as I was saying, in order to get the permits to eventually develop there. They entered an agreement with the church, who is now, as the descendant population, working with them to figure out the best way to commemorate, memorialize, and celebrate the people who are buried there. At the moment, Fast forward to right now, what's going on is the lot is being prepared. There is a large scope of work that is the developers, contractors, the archaeologists have created a scope of work that has been approved by the Landmarks Preservation Commission for an archaeological excavation and investigation on discovering where the remaining burials are and working in conjunction with the church and with the developer on how to properly commemorate them and preserve them as possible. There are a bunch of moving parts, and it's a 40-page scope of work, and I'm sure that many people on this call have actually looked at these sort of things. It's a little complicated, although not terribly. As part of the proposal for the new development, a portion of the new development in the actual new building will be used, or is proposed to be used, as some sort of memorial space that will be celebrating the history of the space. It is our hope that this is opened up to the public, that the community board, that the Elmhurst Society, that the local officials can be part of this conversation. Legally, they don't need to be, but we think it's the right thing that they should be. Furthermore, it is, according to the scope of work, as I understand it, that all the bodies will be reinterred on the site itself. So, Katie, you can take that down now. And you know, I got the scope of work from the Landmarks Preservation Commission. It is last week. I read it. I shared it with Marialena and her colleagues. And I'm happy to sort of discuss that with them. And I'm also see a lot of questions in the chat, so I'm going to start addressing that. But James, Jennifer, Marialena, if you want to sort of share other things, please talk about that while I'm looking at the questions.
I just wanted to add that part of the difficulty was also the lack of the recorded history of our community. So when we started going around and trying to get information, well, everything is easier now with Google and the internet, but going back to the community itself, the people from the community couldn't remember. And those who were old enough, like James had stated, some of them even said, oh yes, that place is haunted. As kids, they would say, but no one actually knew of the history of the community or what had been there. So that was, I think that was even a more difficult task, trying to inform and educate the community. And our community is so diverse, as is all of New York City, that it's become something very special for us to take it on and educate everyone from our past, all of our information, and try to preserve this. So I think part of this is not only preserving, but also educating ourselves on it and being able to continue with this educating of future, generations.
Yeah, I have to say, Jennifer's absolutely right. That's been a big part of it as well. Just us, as we were researching and uncovering so much information, we were shocked with so many discoveries that we found out. Just being the one of the 3 freed communities in New York City was Newtown at the time, Seneca Village, and Weeksville. So just that in itself was so important. And we knew about some of the history, but we were just, the layers kept on uncovering themselves, and we're like, wow, this is just so important. Just like James also had mentioned before, the street, 90th Street, is named after Reverend James Pennington. He was actually the first teacher at there was an African American school along with the church at the site, and he had a lot of influence there as well. So I mean, if James wants to go into more of that history, but just uncovering all these important people and just how important this community was to the the freed African American communities in New York City, being the third. We were just like astonished. But yeah, so it just, I'm sure there's going to be more history and revelations to uncover about the site and the people, and we'll continue to hopefully educate, like Jennifer said, and just spread the word as much as we can.
I just saw a little notation down here, and just to remind people who haven't seen the Woman in the Iron Coffin PBS special, Secrets of the Dead, basically the chief medical examiner archaeologist, who was the original one at the scene, took it upon himself to pore through census records and also did these thermodynamic imaging of the body, which revealed lesions internally and even throughout the brain cavity. And basically, this was the first time in history something has been done this way, to see the full dimensional imaging of the body in such a way. And also poring through census records, it was revealed that more than 10% of the population, which was sizable, of African Americans, the surname was Peterson. Based on the age of the body, as well as the relationships with the casket company founder, Amon Fisk. The likelihood, maybe 95%, is that it was Martha Peterson. And what you see is not an artist's rendition of what Martha Peterson looked like. It's an actual more than three-dimensional. It really gives a very close look at what she did look like. So and it almost reveals her personality. It's a wonderful based on her complete body and structure of the skull, which was damaged. The backhoe crushed through her upper jaw, through her thorax with her chest cavity, and that's when she was initially rediscovered. As far as the site itself, let me just say once again, is that James W. Pennington, who taught there and preached there on 3 separate locations, was a well-known orator. He was a preacher and a wonderful speaker, an escaped slave himself who had traveled to Europe and wrote a book. And people need to recognize this name and remember, this was over 100 years before the modern-day civil rights movement, where he was rebelling against the establishment and speaking about the rights and the mobility of African-American citizens. So we were thinking, of course, that the site should be preserved and saved just for the presence of James W. Pennington, in addition to, of course, the burial ground and its occupants.
All right. Thank you so much, James. I'm going to take a couple of questions. I'm going to do sort of lightning round here. It's pretty fast. Everyone should understand that while we, in this year of plague 2020, think that an iron coffin is a very unusual thing, it was a little bit of a fad at the time. It was a short-lived fad, and it was a middle-class thing. That was also, as James said, there was a local developer, a local manufacturer of that. So that in and of itself was odd, but not indicative of anything more than that this was a person of respect within the community, and this was a serious burial. Additionally, as James addressed, the shattering of it. Let me just sort of wander through. The Descended Church, Frank Sanchez, the Descended Church is one of the parties. It's the developer and the Descended Church who are literally making all the decisions here. One of our concerns as being a voice of the community is having the community have a voice in it. At the moment, all the discussions are going on between the descendant church, Reverend Kim, and I don't know her last name, and the developer, who I don't know the name off the top of my head, who are having these negotiations sort of under the auspices of the Landmarks Preservation Commission. The differences between Seneca Village and the African burial grounds, those are three separate projects. The African burial grounds were, of course, discovered during the excavation for a federal project, and that brought in the full weight of the federal government and the National Register as something that could mitigate and ameliorate the possible effects. Because this is a private development, it falls under, there's much lesser government oversight than in the case of the African burial ground. Seneca Village, I'm not as well versed in the history of discovering Seneca Village, but again, no one was actually, to my knowledge, nobody was actually planning on doing anything in Seneca Village. It's in Central Park. So while these are all, and also Seneca Village, while there was a burial ground in Seneca Village, that is an archaeological remain of a displaced community, as opposed to the African burial ground and what we're dealing with here in Elmhurst, which were church yards. So those are, while similar, they're not all the same thing.
Can I just add something, Simeon? I think this site just raises a broader question, like Katie was saying in the beginning in the introduction, that in terms of a country, we really have to analyze when something like this is found, maybe make legislation to help, preserve sites like this, or better facilitate some type of way that it can be preserved. So I just think it leads, like, just everyone has to think in a broader sense. This is happening all over the country with African American burial sites, and also just maybe colonial sites as well, just really old cemeteries or burial grounds. So this is something that, right now there really is no protection. It's just like you were saying, like a one case, like each case is a different scenario. So maybe that's something that we have to, like, as a country, look at in a, with a different approach on how we can go forward with, things like this that are constantly being found and a threat,
That's very, very true. Somebody asked in the questions, and it was talked about in the chat also, questioning about the grave markers, and that is always a perennial problem with grave sites and burial grounds, that because preservation comes at it by and large from a preservation of the physical characteristics, we tend to think of grave markers as the graves themselves, and that's as wrong as thinking that the dial of a watch is actually the clock. And
actually, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We have a picture before the church was demolished with the gravesite in the back, and even before it's demolished, there doesn't seem to be any tombstones or grave markers. I don't know if Katie can bring that up. It's a black and white photo of the back of the church with land behind it. It was showed in the beginning slides, but I'm sure not anyone really knew what they were looking at that point. So if we could bring that up, I think a lot of people would really like to see that.
And well, Kate, that's great.
Yes.
Yes.
So this is the photo I was just mentioning. So this area, which is just mainly grass and greenery, this is the actual cemetery. This is the burial ground. And if you look right ahead, there's a little steeple building in the middle, kind of in the middle of the photo. That's the church, and right next to it would be the school. So this photo, was probably right shortly before it actually did get demolished. And if you see all the way to the right of the photo, there's a very large tower, that's Newtown High School, which is a New York City landmark. It's currently obviously still there. But this is a great photo to show you, even, back then, that I guess nobody was present at this church building. They were already, the St. Mark's was already on their second site, and there was no grave markers back then. So it's preservation, like you said. It's great to see that, but at the same time, equally, this is important, even if there's no grave markers.
If I may add something else, it's also important to make some type of law, like Marialena said, in order to preserve or acknowledge these places and their historical significance, especially like the burial ground for African Americans and the Native Indigenous peoples of our country. Remember that our area, Newtown, before we had an indigenous population, and we have no history of these people anymore. There's nothing left of them. Now with the African American people who were here during Newtown, we have to remember the majority of the community were laborers, and they were not very rich. So a lot of the markers would have been made out of stone or wood. So that would not have lasted due to weathering and time. Another thing that's also important that we have to make a point of is that many of the African American people during or before the Civil War, if you were not a member of a church, you were not allowed to be buried in a cemetery. So you needed to be part or a member of a church. So that's another point that we have to be mindful and to recognize and make it part of history. So I think that's another reason why we should take more interest in this and make some changes to the laws and help preserve these.
Yes, people should also understand, a number of years ago, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission actually did a study of burial grounds within Manhattan. And a lot of New York is built on burial grounds, particularly within Manhattan, until the Cemetery Act of, and my friends at Greenwood would yell at me something fierce for not remembering when the Cemetery Act was. I believe it was the 1860s. I could be incorrect. But there was an act by New York State government that said that there couldn't be cemeteries within the incorporated settlements, which then spread the cemeteries into Queens, and that's when you had the long stretch of cemeteries in Queens pre-consolidation, and also the cemeteries in the Bronx. Greenwood itself, which is a National Historic Landmark, predated that. Anyway, a lot of cemeteries and burial grounds, like famously the African burial ground of the Commons, exist within Manhattan, and they are built upon it. So that is sort of a question of, where are we as a culture? How do you deal with burial grounds? Are they sacred sites? Is there a way of reinterring them? Greenwood Cemetery itself has incorporated many, many old churchyards within its burial grounds. Do you disinter and reinter? Do you say you can't build on that forever? Do you do archaeology? Because remember that one of the funny things about archaeology is that it is inherently a destructive science. You dig something out of the ground and you often take it out of the ground and put it in a museum. It's no longer in the ground. It's not like preservation where you're saying this is an important building and we're going to preserve it. Of course, you try to preserve things in situ, but not always. So these are kind of complicated issues that to be grappled with.
Simeon, the Rural Cemetery Act was 1847.
1847. Thank you. I thought it was the 1860s. I knew I was wrong, and I apologize to my friends at Greenwood, Rich Moylan, who is wonderful, and who's, I thought, drummed that into my head.
And I just wanted to add another fact about the coffins, the iron coffins. remember, and they also had a big thing on PBS, which gave it was a documentary as to why these coffins were made. They were made because before, obviously, wherever you happen to die, that's where you were buried. A lot of people, and this happened to the Almond family, one of the brothers passed away in another state, and there was no way of getting him here on time or participate in a funeral for the whole family. So they had a company, James knows more about this, about something about baking or ovens. So they came up with the idea, and a lot of famous people with money, like Abraham Lincoln's son, Dolly Madison, and other famous people were buried in these caskets. So that's one of the reasons why the body of Martha Peterson was so perfectly preserved. And no, and it also helped with not only historically with what we're uncovering now and learning about our community, but also the scientific part that we never knew that smallpox, not only was it invasive on the outside of the body, but internally, how deep it went. So that this has been such an, I think it's groundbreaking, this exploration that was found here in the cemetery. So it's like, basically, it's a lot to be learned and we have to preserve it.
A few people are asking, for more resources about the site itself. Have you, does the Elmhurst Society have a website that has all those photographs and has a site plan and stuff like that? I mean, I know I've got it scrolled away in emails, but I don't want to have to deal with that. So.
Yeah, we do have a lot of photographs. Unfortunately, we don't have a site like a great website. It's just very basic. Maybe that's something we can work on in the future. For instance, you saw that map that Katie had put on. It was like just a white basic map, and then the picture of the burial ground. So it's something that we could kind of show people exactly like where it's located to get a better idea. But like you said earlier, right now there's only a driveway to access the property. So it's not even something you would see walking by. You have to definitely walk up a driveway and then bear a little bit to the left, and then you will see the burial grounds in the back. Because there's a building in the front and there's buildings on the side. So there's only, and then the railroad, like you had mentioned, in the back. So it's not something that you can actually see unless you go there and you go up this driveway. So that's one of the difficulties, just also explaining where it is, because a lot of people they don't visually see it, so they don't know where it is. That's also been a little problem that we have to always explain to people. Maybe in the future, if there's proper signage also, in that area, and if it's something that people can visit, we could advocate for signage, which would be a good idea.
No, that would be really great.
We put up numerous articles that were written on the Facebook page as well, Elmhurst History and Cemeteries Preservation Society. Sometimes I guess you have to scroll back and look for them and some of the photos. But we talk about history, back in time, but history is also always in motion in the present. And although we've done so much to make the public aware of this site, we still have people that are neighbors that are living right near there that are saying, where is it? Oh, it's a burial ground. So it's always about constant reinforcement and letting people know and not feeling frustrated by our efforts, and also trying to be amicable towards the church, who went in with the developer and LPC to have these discussions. So, at some point in the future, we'll be doing our walking tours again. And we don't know still to this day, what is it really going to look like a few years down the road. But we'll speak of it respectfully, and as well, the correct history of the site, and honorably, basically. Thank you.
And
Yeah,
thank you, James. And what we're really looking for now, and I just put in the chat, is for, and it's, the pressure point at this point it seems the most appropriate to contact the Landmarks Commission to ask them for the parties to make a public presentation. While they might not have the actual authority to do so, one would think that if the agency said, hey, can you let everyone know what's going on, as Marialena said, a press release is supposed to be coming out soon. We just want to make sure that everybody learns as much and knows as much about the site as all you've been asking, because it's very important. It's very important to the history of Queens and the history of New York. This was a very early freed Black church that people 200 years later are not really aware of.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's a question, Simeon, also from that they're asking how many burials are still in place, and basically that varies depending on the studies. But originally, I think the church reinterred 15, and then after the discovery of the iron coffin lady, it was her, and then I think they found about 7 more remains, but just partial remains. So basically right now, and with the study, with the partial, that came out now, they found more remains. So we still don't know exactly how many are in the area.
We might never know exactly how many remains are on the site. Early estimations, even from earlier archaeological estimations, are very conservative. Let me just say that
Agree.
they need to, they are not doing LIDAR, which is ground penetrating radar yet. But what's going on, just so everyone knows, is they are removing 7 to 10 feet of fill. I mean, like old cars, old sofas, stuff like that. And then they are planning to, according to the scope of work, once they've removed the disturbed fill, they will be doing hand digging, using hand tools on this. I believe, I would need to check precisely, I believe they suspect that they know of at least 100 burial sites, potential burial sites, and the actual number could greatly exceed that.
Yeah, I just want to add, according to our research, there is the church document, original documents had stated over 300 burials at the site, almost about 350. But as James had said earlier, a lot of people suspect this burial ground could have dated even before 1828. So the numbers are definitely, we have an estimated of 350, but it could be a lot more people who were buried there that were not documented, because it's so old, because the documentation in African American communities weren't so great back then. So it is something that's going to be interesting to see, how many remains are uncovered, and it's just sad, that we don't have that exact information, but we wish we did.
And that is, we have every belief that the archaeological excavation that's going on right now will answer some of those questions. And we believe in good faith that they are moving forward with all diligence and professionalism. So stay tuned is the answer. And what we really want to do is we want to make sure that as much public information comes out. Somebody was asking if there was any connection to the Underground Railroad. I haven't heard of any Underground Railroad connections. Have y'all?
No, in our research, we didn't see anything pertaining to that. No.
Yeah. Of course, as people on the on this call probably know, it's very hard to actually track Underground Railroad and abolitionist activity, because once the Fugitive Slave Act was passed, it was criminalized. So you could actually be fined or go to jail for involving yourself in such things. So perforce, there was a lack of records kept.
Yeah, I mean, and also, you know, I don't know exactly how large the African American community was in Newtown. We you know, we don't have a number about that either, but we do know that they the African American community also networked a lot in Newtown. We had a lot of historic churches and congregations in Newtown. We still do. And they actually, an interesting fact, I don't know if James wants to speak about it, that Booker T. Washington actually came to speak at one of our other historic churches, the Newtown the first Presbyterian church in Newtown. I'm so sorry. So he came to speak at that church to help the St. Mark's build their new building and finish building it. So there was a lot of, it seemed like, you know, a lot of people helped each other in this community as well through our research. I don't know if James, you want to speak more about that.
Yes, my understanding was that Booker T. Washington came around 1915 or so in order to help drum up support for the St. Mark's AME. At that time, perhaps the population of African Americans were already moving to other areas. And the First Presbyterian Church of Newtown, whose congregation dates back to the birth of Newtown, which was then Middleburg, had offered to assistance and support to the St. Mark's AME and had even given them physical pews and whatnot. So Booker T. Washington, who came to give a speech at First Presbyterian in support of St. Mark's, and also James W. Pennington, way before that, was a good friend of Frederick Douglass. So there were a lot of historical figures that tied together. And as far as the burial ground, we were originally told there were 16 to 18 pits that were abutting the Long Island Railroad against the back wall. But it seems now that there are other, where it says testing 1, testing 2, that there are other burial points that have burials that exist, except for the whole center area. We obviously don't know what actors may have been involved, but one archaeologist told us that it could have been the degradation of the wood of the coffins which were used, and bones over time through the elements, through the environment, also may have been dug up and dumped elsewhere without realizing. So that's a possibility that some of the burials may have been moved, but we don't of course, know the full story of what happened if we don't have the complete 310 burials which were originally in the report.
Hi, thank you all so much for this conversation. We're about at time. So Simeon, did you want to hit one more question before we wrap up?
I think that everyone should just make sure to look at the Elmhurst Facebook page, which is where you keep everything, and you posted that to keep it posted. If you're feeling like wanting to get involved, contact the Landmarks Commission and just simply ask that more public information be presented in a polite way, but this is something of grave importance. And thank you all very much, and thanks to the Preservation League for shining a light on this.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you all so much for joining us. This was a great conversation. Stay connected. We have lots of great programming, and we'll be talking more about the Elmhurst African American Burial Ground, all of our 7 to Save sites, and lots of other preservation stuff going on around New York State. So we hope to stay connected with you all. And thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.